I stood there in my driveway, holding my son's Purple Heart medal in my trembling hands, watching as 3 police cars pulled up to our new lake cabin. The HOA president stood behind me with her arms crossed, that smug smile spreading across her face like poison. "Yes, officers, I called about suspicious activity," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This person claims to own this property, but I have never seen them before." My blood turned to ice. My son was halfway across the world, serving his country in Afghanistan, and I was moving his belongings into the surprise homecoming gift I had saved 3 years to buy. This woman had just called the police on a military parent preparing for their hero's return. That was the moment I realized this was not just about moving day. This was war. And I was about to show this HOA exactly what happens when you mess with a military family. 3 months earlier, I sat in my kitchen staring at the real estate listing that would change everything. The lake cabin was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a dock that stretched out into the crystal-clear water like an invitation to peace. After 18 months of deployment, my son Marcus deserved this kind of sanctuary. I had been saving every penny since he left for Afghanistan, working double shifts at the hospital, skipping dinners out, selling furniture I did not need. The military pay helped, but buying a lakefront property was still a stretch for a single parent. Every dollar that went into that savings account was a prayer that he would come home safe to enjoy it. The Pine Lake community looked like something from a postcard. Manicured lawns stretched between beautiful homes, and the HOA maintained everything to perfection. The property values were stable, the neighborhood was quiet, and the fishing was supposed to be incredible. Marcus had always loved fishing with his grandfather before he passed away. When I signed the papers, my hands shook with excitement. This was not just a real estate transaction. This was me creating a place where my son could decompress, heal, and remember what he was fighting for overseas. The first hint of trouble came during the closing process. The HOA president, Linda Mitchell, insisted on being present during the final walkthrough. She was a thin woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back so tight it stretched her forehead. She wore a navy blazer and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. "I hope you understand that Pine Lake community has very strict standards," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "We have maintained our property values through rigorous enforcement of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions." I nodded politely, assuming she meant normal things like keeping the grass cut and not painting the house neon pink. Every neighborhood had rules. How bad could it be? The real estate agent, Janet, gave me a look that said more than words. After Linda left, Janet pulled me aside. "Just a heads up," she whispered. "Linda can be intense. Some of the other residents have had issues with her interpretation of the HOA rules." I brushed off the warning. I was a responsible homeowner. I kept my current house neat, followed the rules, and never caused problems. Plus, my son was serving his country overseas. Surely that would earn some basic respect and consideration. As I drove through the neighborhood that first day, I noticed small things that should have been red flags. A house with a tiny garden gnome sitting behind a bush, like it was hiding. Another home with beautiful flower boxes that looked like they had been measured with a ruler to ensure perfect symmetry. Even the mailboxes were identical, positioned at exactly the same distance from the street. But I was too focused on the surprise I was planning to pay attention to the warning signs. Marcus had no idea about the cabin. In his letters, he talked about missing the lake where we used to camp when he was young. He wrote about dreaming of quiet mornings and the sound of water lapping against the shore. This cabin would be his welcome home gift. a place where he could transition back to civilian life, invite his military friends for weekends, and build new memories to replace the ones that kept him awake at night. I spent weeks planning every detail. I would move his belongings from our old house into the cabin while he was still deployed. His room would be set up exactly how he liked it. His fishing gear would be ready. His favorite snacks would be stocked in the kitchen. When he came home, I would drive him straight to the lake. He would see the cabin, the dock, the peaceful water, and know that someone had been thinking about his happiness every single day he was gone. It was going to be perfect. The moving truck arrived at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. I had deliberately chosen the weekend, thinking most neighbors would be sleeping in or busy with their own activities. I wanted to get Marcus's things moved in quietly, without drawing attention or causing any disruption. The movers were professional and efficient. They unloaded boxes of military uniforms, awards, and personal items with the respect these things deserved. I carried the most precious items myself. His Purple Heart from an IED explosion that nearly killed him, photos of his unit, letters from children at schools that had adopted his battalion. I was arranging his medals in a display case when I heard the sharp sound of high heels clicking up the driveway. Through the window, I saw Linda Mitchell marching toward my front door like she was leading a cavalry charge. She did not knock, she pounded. "Excuse me," she said when I opened the door. Her face was flushed red with anger. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" "I am moving into my home," I said calmly, confused by her aggressive tone. "Is there a problem?" "There are multiple problems," she snapped, pulling out her clipboard. "First, you did not file the proper moving permit with the HOA. Second, your moving truck is blocking the street and creating a traffic hazard. Third, you are generating excessive noise during quiet hours." I looked at my watch. It was 8:15 in the morning. Quiet hours. "Quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. on weekends," she said, like she was reciting scripture. "You are clearly in violation." The movers were working quietly and efficiently. They were not playing music, yelling, or making any unnecessary noise. This was about as respectful as a move could possibly be. "I am sorry," I said, trying to keep the peace. "I was not aware of those specific rules. My son is deployed overseas with the Army, and I am preparing the cabin for his return. I can have the movers wrap up in the next hour." Linda's expression did not soften. If anything, she looked more annoyed. "I do not care about your personal circumstances," she said coldly. "The rules apply to everyone equally. You will need to stop this activity immediately and file the proper paperwork before proceeding." My heart sank. I had planned this move for weeks. The movers were already here, already working. Marcus was supposed to come home in 2 weeks, and I wanted everything ready. "Could we maybe work something out?" I asked. "I understand about the permit, but the movers are already here. It would cost me hundreds of dollars to reschedule." "That is not my problem," Linda said. "You should have followed the proper procedures." One of the movers, a kind older man named Dave, approached us. He had been listening to the conversation and could see the tension. "Ma'am," he said to Linda, "we have moved families into hundreds of HOA communities. We are being as respectful as possible, and we will be finished within 2 hours." Linda turned on him like a snake. "You are not part of this community, and you have no right to speak to me. You are trespassing on private property." "Actually," I said, feeling my patience wearing thin, "they are on my property working for me with my permission." "Your property is subject to HOA covenants," Linda shot back. "And right now, you are in violation of at least 3 separate regulations." I took a deep breath. This woman was clearly difficult, but I needed to find a way to work with her. My son's homecoming was too important to let this turn into a major conflict. Linda, I understand you are just trying to maintain community standards, I said. But my son has been deployed for 18 months. He is serving his country overseas. I am trying to create a peaceful place for him to come home to. Can we please find a reasonable solution? Her response shocked me to my core. I do not care if your son is deployed or not, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Military service does not give you special privileges to break HOA rules. You are not above the law. The movers stopped working. Even they could not believe what they had just heard. Furthermore, Linda continued, if you do not stop this unauthorized activity immediately, I will be forced to take additional action. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. Who are you calling? I asked. 911, she said with that same cold smile. I am reporting suspicious activity and a potential break-in. My blood turned to ice. She was calling the police on a military parent moving their child's belongings into their own home. This is Linda Mitchell, HOA president of Pine Lake Community, she said into the phone. I need to report suspicious activity at 247 Lakeshore Drive. There is an unauthorized person claiming to own this property, and they have brought in a moving truck without proper permits. I stood there in shock, holding my son's Purple Heart medal, listening to this woman criminalize an act of love. 20 minutes later, 3 police cars pulled into my driveway. I watched through the window as 6 officers got out, their hands resting near their weapons. My heart pounded as I realized how this must look from their perspective. A 911 call about suspicious activity, a moving truck, and someone claiming to own property. I stepped outside with my hands visible, carrying the folder of documentation I had prepared. The lead officer, a tall man with kind eyes, approached me calmly. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "I am Officer Rodriguez. We received a call about suspicious activity at this address. Can you tell me what is going on here?" "I am moving into my home," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I purchased this property 3 months ago. I have all the documentation right here." Linda stepped forward, still clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Officer, I am Linda Mitchell, president of the Pine Lake Community HOA. This person claims to own this property, but I have never seen them before today. They are conducting unauthorized activity in violation of our community standards." Officer Rodriguez looked between us, already sensing the real nature of this call. "Ma'am, do you have proof of ownership?" I handed him the folder. "Here is my deed, my closing paperwork, my homeowner's insurance policy, and my utility setup confirmations." He reviewed the documents carefully while his partner spoke with the movers. After a few minutes, he looked up with an expression of controlled frustration. "Ma'am, these documents clearly show that you own this property," he said. "You have every right to be here and to move your belongings into your home." Linda's face turned red. "But what about the HOA violations? What about the unauthorized moving permit?" "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, turning to Linda, "HOA violations are civil matters. We do not enforce private community rules. If you have a dispute with your neighbor, you need to resolve it through civil channels." "But I called about suspicious activity," Linda insisted. "How was I supposed to know this person actually owned the property?" "You could have asked to see their documentation before calling 911, the officer replied, his tone becoming more firm. "You could have checked the property records. You could have used any number of civil approaches before involving law enforcement." Another officer, a woman in her 40s, approached me. "Ma'am, I see some military items in your moving boxes. Are you a veteran?" "My son is," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "He is deployed in Afghanistan right now. I bought this cabin as a surprise for when he comes home. I am trying to get his things moved in before he returns." The officers exchanged glances. The female officer's expression softened. "Your son is deployed?" she asked. "Yes, Army infantry. This is his second deployment. He has been gone for 18 months. Officer Rodriguez looked at Linda with barely concealed disgust. "Ma'am, you called 911 on a military family preparing for their son's homecoming." "I did not know about any military connection," Linda said defensively. "I was just enforcing community standards." "You called emergency services to report a property owner moving into their own home," Officer Rodriguez said. "This is exactly the kind of frivolous 911 call that wastes taxpayer resources and prevents us from responding to real emergencies." Linda tried to maintain her authority. "Officers, I still need you to inform this person about the HOA violations. The moving truck is blocking the street, and they did not file the proper permits." "Ma'am," the female officer said, "we are not here to enforce your HOA rules. We are here because you reported suspicious activity that turned out to be completely legal and appropriate activity by a homeowner on their own property." Furthermore, Officer Rodriguez added, "making false reports to 911 is a misdemeanor offense. You could be cited for this." Linda's confident facade began to crumble. "False report. I genuinely believed there was suspicious activity." "You believed a homeowner moving into their own home with professional movers in broad daylight was suspicious?" the officer asked, without making any attempt to verify the situation first. The movers had been watching this entire exchange. Dave, the lead mover, approached Officer Rodriguez. "Officer, we have moved thousands of families. We are licensed, bonded, and insured. We are conducting normal legal moving services. We will be finished within the hour." "That is fine," Officer Rodriguez said. "You are doing nothing wrong." He turned back to Linda. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you familiarize yourself with the appropriate procedures for addressing HOA concerns. Calling 911 should be reserved for actual emergencies, not civil disputes." As the officers prepared to leave, the female officer approached me again. "Ma'am, thank you for your family's service. I hope your son has a safe homecoming." "Thank you," I said, tears forming in my eyes. "I just wanted to create a peaceful place for him to come home to." She glanced at Linda, who was still standing there with her clipboard, looking deflated and angry. "Good luck with that," she said quietly. After the police left, Linda looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This is not over," she said. "You may have fooled the police, but you still violated HOA regulations. You will be hearing from our attorney." She turned and walked away, her high heels clicking against the pavement like bullets. As I watched her go, I felt something change inside me. The shock and confusion were being replaced by something else. Anger, determination, the protective instinct of a parent whose child had been disrespected. This woman had just called the police on a military family. She had tried to criminalize my love for my son. She had shown complete disrespect for his service and sacrifice. That night, after the movers finished and left, I sat in my son's room surrounded by his belongings. His uniforms hung in the closet. His medals sat in their display case. His letters from children thanking him for his service were stacked on his desk. I made a decision that would change everything. Linda Mitchell, had just picked a fight with the wrong military parent. That night I could not sleep. I kept replaying the events of the day, feeling the anger build in my chest like a fire that would not go out. Linda Mitchell had not just violated basic human decency. She had attacked my family, my son's service, and everything I had worked for. I opened my laptop and began researching. If Linda wanted to play the rules game, then I would learn the rules better than she ever had. I started with the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The document was 47 pages long and written in dense legal language designed to intimidate rather than inform. But I read every word twice. What I found was shocking. The HOA had been operating outside its own bylaws for years. According to the original covenants, any fines over $50 required a hearing. Any major rule changes required a vote of the entire community. Any expenditure over $500 required board approval with proper documentation. I pulled up the HOA meeting minutes for the past 2 years. Linda had been imposing fines up to $500 without hearings. She had implemented new rules without community votes. She had authorized expenditures that were never properly documented. But that was just the beginning. I researched state HOA regulations and found that our HOA was violating multiple state laws. They were required to provide annual financial reports to residents. They were required to maintain proper insurance. They were required to hold elections every 2 years with proper notice. None of these requirements had been met. I spent the next 3 days digging deeper. I created a spreadsheet tracking every violation, every inconsistency, every abuse of power. The picture that emerged was of an organization that had been operating like a personal fiefdom rather than a legitimate community association. On Thursday, I decided to reach out to other residents. I started with Janet, the real estate agent who had warned me about Linda during the closing. "Oh, honey," Janet said when I called, "you have no idea what you are dealing with. Linda has been terrorizing this community for 3 years. She has fined people for having the wrong color welcome mats. She has sent violation notices for grass that was an inch too long. She has made life miserable for anyone who dares to question her authority." "Has anyone ever fought back?" I asked. "A few people have tried," Janet said sadly. "But Linda threatens them with legal action, and most people just give up. It is easier to pay the fines than to fight." "What about the elderly couple in the blue house?" I asked. "I saw them looking upset when I drove through the neighborhood." "Harold and Margaret Thompson," Janet said. "Linda has been harassing them for months. She fined them for having a bird feeder that was apparently too close to the property line. When they tried to contest it, she doubled the fine." I felt my anger growing. "Can you give me their phone number?" That afternoon, I visited Harold and Margaret Thompson. They were a sweet couple in their 70s who had lived in the community for 5 years. Harold was a Korean War veteran, and Margaret was a retired schoolteacher. "That woman is evil," Margaret said, her voice shaking with emotion. "She has made our lives miserable. We are thinking about selling our home just to get away from her." "What exactly has she done to you?" I asked. Harold pulled out a folder thick with violation notices. "She has fined us for everything imaginable. Our mailbox was supposedly 2 inches too far from the curb. Our garden gnome was visible from the street. Our American flag was too large for the flagpole." "She fined you for displaying the American flag?" I asked, incredulous. "She said it violated the aesthetic standards of the community," Margaret said. "Harold fought in Korea, and she told him his flag was too big." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Linda was not just controlling. She was targeting veterans and military families. Has she done this to other military families? I asked. There is a young Navy wife 3 streets over, Harold said. Linda has been harassing her while her husband is deployed, fining her for things like leaving her trash cans out too long after pickup day. I spent the rest of the week visiting other residents. The pattern was clear and disgusting. Linda was specifically targeting anyone she perceived as vulnerable: military families, elderly residents, single parents, and anyone who worked irregular hours. The Navy wife, Sarah, was a 24-year-old mother of 2 whose husband was deployed on a submarine. Linda had fined her repeatedly for violations that were clearly the result of being overwhelmed and alone. I work 2 jobs to make ends meet while my husband is gone, Sarah told me, tears in her eyes. I do my best to keep up with everything, but sometimes I forget to bring in the trash cans right away. She has fined me $300 for that. $300? I asked. She said it was a repeat violation, so the fine escalated, Sarah explained. I can barely afford groceries, let alone pay these fines. I began documenting every case, every violation, every abuse of power. But my research also uncovered something more serious. The HOA financial records did not add up. Thousands of dollars in fines and fees were being collected, but the community improvements were minimal. I filed a formal request for financial records under state law. Linda tried to deny the request, but state regulations were clear. She had to provide them within 30 days. When the records arrived, I could not believe what I was seeing. Linda had been paying herself a management fee of $2,000 per month. The original HOA bylaws specified that all board positions were volunteer only. She had also been using HOA funds for personal expenses, dinners charged as board meetings, gas receipts for her personal vehicle charged as community business, even clothing purchases charged as professional expenses. This was not just abuse of power, this was theft. I stayed up until 3 in the morning documenting everything. Every financial irregularity, every violation of state law, every abuse of vulnerable residents. I was building a case that would not just stop Linda Mitchell, but would destroy her completely. My son was coming home in 10 days, but he was not coming home to the peaceful sanctuary I had planned. He was coming home to a war zone. The difference was, this time I was ready for battle. I filed my first formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory agency on Monday morning. The complaint was 23 pages long and included documentation of financial irregularities, violations of state law, and systematic harassment of vulnerable residents. But I was just getting started. I contacted a civil rights attorney who specialized in military family discrimination. When I explained the situation, she was immediately interested. What Linda Mitchell did constitutes harassment of military families under both state and federal law, she said. Calling 911 on a military parent preparing for their child's homecoming could be considered a hate crime. A hate crime? I asked. Military families are a protected class under federal civil rights legislation, she explained. Targeting them for harassment based on their military status is illegal. I also filed complaints with the Federal Trade Commission and the State Attorney General's office. Each complaint was meticulously documented with evidence, witness statements, and legal citations. Then I started building my coalition. I organized a meeting at the community center for all residents who had been harassed by Linda Mitchell. I expected maybe 5 or 6 people to show up. 27 people came. They brought their violation notices, their fines, their documentation of harassment. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating. Linda had fined a single mother for having children's toys visible in her backyard. She had harassment an elderly man with dementia over his garden maintenance. She had targeted a young couple who worked night shifts for noise violations when they came home from work. "This ends now," I told the group. "We are going to fight back and we are going to win." We formed the Pine Lake Community Resident Coalition. Everyone contributed what they could. Some people provided documentation. Others offered to testify. A few residents with professional skills volunteered their services. One resident, a former journalist named Mike, offered to contact the local news. "This is exactly the kind of story that gets people fired up," he said. "Military family harassment, HOA abuse, elderly victims. The media will eat this up." Within 3 days, I had interviews scheduled with 2 local news stations and the regional newspaper. The first news story aired on Thursday evening. The headline was "HOA President Calls Police on Military Family." The story featured interviews with Harold Thompson about his flag fine, Sarah about her harassment as a Navy wife, and me about the 911 call. The community reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The news station's Facebook page was flooded with comments from outraged viewers. People were sharing the story, demanding action, calling for Linda's resignation. Linda tried to fight back with her own media strategy. She issued a statement claiming that she was just enforcing legitimate community standards and that she was being unfairly attacked by residents who wanted to break the rules. Her statement was a disaster. She came across as cold, unsympathetic, and completely out of touch with community values. Several news outlets picked up her quote about not caring about military service, and it spread across social media like wildfire. The second news story aired on Sunday and focused on the financial irregularities. The reporter had done his own investigation and found that Linda had been paying herself over $24,000 per year from HOA funds while claiming to be a volunteer. That story included an interview with a state HOA regulatory official who confirmed that Linda's financial arrangements were illegal and that the state was investigating potential criminal charges. By Monday, Linda was in full panic mode. She sent out a community-wide email claiming that she was the victim of a coordinated attack by disgruntled residents who wanted to destroy the community's property values. Her email was tone-deaf and desperate. She attacked me personally, calling me a troublemaker who was trying to turn residents against each other. She threatened legal action against anyone who continued to spread what she called lies and defamation. The email backfired spectacularly. Residents who had been neutral in the conflict were now openly angry at Linda's aggressive tactics and personal attacks. On Tuesday, I received the best news possible. My son Marcus called from Afghanistan. "Mom," he said, "I am coming home early. My unit is rotating back next week instead of next month." My heart soared. After all the conflict and stress, my son was finally coming home. "I have been seeing some news stories about HOA problems," he said. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," I told him. "I am handling it." "Are you sure? Because the stories make it sound pretty serious." I thought about how to explain everything that had happened. My son had been dealing with life-and-death situations for 18 months. The last thing he needed was to worry about his mother's neighborhood drama. "Marcus, when you get home, you are going to find that your mother has become something of a community activist," I said. "But everything is going to be fine. I promise." What I did not tell him was that his early return meant he would be home in time for the most important battle of this entire war. The special HOA board meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Linda had called the meeting to address what she called the campaign of harassment against her leadership. But I had a different plan for that meeting. I was going to present evidence of her crimes to the entire community. I was going to expose her abuse of power in front of everyone she had terrorized. And my son, my hero, my reason for fighting this battle, would be there to see his mother deliver justice. Saturday morning, Marcus came home. I picked him up at the airport and we drove straight to the lake cabin. When he saw the property, his reaction was everything I had hoped for and more. "Mom, this is incredible," he said, his eyes wide with amazement. "You did this for me." "You deserved a peaceful place to come home to," I said, fighting back tears. "You have sacrificed so much for your country. This is my way of saying thank you." He walked through the cabin, touching his medals in their display case, seeing his room set up exactly how he liked it. When he got to the dock, he stood quietly for a long moment, looking out over the water. "This is perfect," he said finally. "This is exactly what I needed." I told him about the conflict with Linda Mitchell, about the 911 call, about the investigation I had conducted. His expression grew darker with each detail. "She called the police on you for moving my things?" he asked. "She said she did not care about your military service," I replied. "She said it did not give our family any special privileges." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm but cold. "Mom, I have been fighting overseas to protect the rights and freedoms of people like Linda Mitchell. The fact that she would use those freedoms to attack military families is disgusting." "There is a community meeting this afternoon," I said. "Linda called it to defend herself against what she calls false accusations. I am going to present my evidence to the entire community." "I am coming with you," Marcus said firmly. "You just got home," I said. "You should rest, relax, enjoy the cabin." "Mom, you have been fighting for me while I was gone," he said. "Now I am home and I am going to fight with you." The community center was packed. Every chair was filled and people were standing along the walls. I had never seen so many residents at an HOA meeting. Linda sat at the front table with the other board members, looking defiant and angry. She had dressed formally in a dark suit, clearly trying to project authority and professionalism. When she saw Marcus in his military uniform, her expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered and called the meeting to order. "This meeting has been called to address the campaign of harassment and defamation that has been directed at me personally and at this board," she began. "Certain residents have been spreading false information and trying to undermine the legitimate authority of this HOA." She looked directly at me. "These attacks are being led by a new resident who has repeatedly violated community standards and refuses to accept the rules that govern this community." A murmur went through the crowd. Several residents looked at her with obvious disgust. "I would like to remind everyone that I have volunteered my time and energy to maintain the property values and community standards that make Pine Lake a desirable place to live," Linda continued. "The accusations against me are false, malicious, and designed to destroy the leadership of this community." When she finished her prepared statement, I stood up. Marcus stood with me, his presence adding weight to every word I was about to say. "My name is Patricia Williams," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. 3 months ago, I bought a home in this community as a surprise for my son, who was deployed in Afghanistan. This is my son, Sergeant Marcus Williams." The room erupted in applause. Marcus nodded respectfully to the crowd. Last week, while I was moving my son's belongings into our home, Linda Mitchell called 911 and reported me for suspicious activity, I continued. She told the police that she did not care about my son's military service and that military families do not deserve special privileges. The crowd's reaction was immediate and angry. Several people shouted their disapproval. Linda's face turned red. "That is not what I said," she protested. "I was simply enforcing community standards." "I have recordings of the entire interaction," I said, pulling out my phone. "Would you like me to play them for the community?" Linda's confidence crumbled. She had not realized that I had recorded the conversation. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have spent the past 2 weeks investigating this HOA's operations. What I found was systematic violations of state law, financial irregularities, and criminal misuse of community funds." I began presenting my evidence. The financial records showing Linda's illegal salary, the documentation of harassment targeting military families, elderly residents, and single parents, the violations of state HOA regulations. With each piece of evidence, the crowd grew more angry. Residents who had been intimidated into silence for years were finally seeing the full scope of Linda's abuse. Harold Thompson stood up. "I am a Korean War veteran, and Linda Mitchell fined me for displaying the American flag. She told me it was too big and violated community aesthetics." Sarah, the Navy wife, stood up next. "She has fined me hundreds of dollars while my husband is deployed, targeting me specifically because I am alone and struggling." One by one, residents stood up and shared their stories. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Linda had been systematically abusing her power to target the most vulnerable members of the community. Linda tried to defend herself, but her explanations sounded hollow and desperate. She claimed that she had only been enforcing legitimate rules, that she had the right to be compensated for her work, that she was being unfairly attacked. "You called the police on a military family preparing for their hero's homecoming," I said, my voice rising with emotion. "You showed complete disrespect for my son's service and sacrifice. You targeted vulnerable residents and stole money from this community." The crowd was on its feet now, demanding Linda's resignation. "I call for a vote of no confidence in Linda Mitchell," I announced. "All in favor." The response was overwhelming. Nearly every hand in the room went up. "All opposed." 3 hands went up, including Linda's. "The vote is 127 to 3, I announced. "Linda Mitchell, you are hereby removed from your position as HOA president." Linda stood up, her face twisted with rage. "This is not over," she shouted. "I will fight this through the courts. I will sue every one of you for defamation." "Good luck with that," I said calmly, "because I have already filed criminal complaints with the State Attorney General's office for embezzlement and fraud." Linda's face went white. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the meeting, but not before turning back one last time. "You people will regret this," she said. "This community will fall apart without proper leadership." After she left, the room burst into applause. People were hugging, celebrating, and thanking me for having the courage to stand up to Linda's tyranny. Marcus put his arm around me. "Mom, I am so proud of you," he said. "You fought for this community while I was fighting overseas. You are a hero." As we drove home to our lake cabin that evening, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in months. The battle was over, justice had been served, and my son was home safe. But the best part was yet to come. 6 months later, I stood on the dock of our lake cabin, watching Marcus teach his younger cousin how to cast a fishing line. The water was calm, the sun was setting,